The CEO executive rejected every man, then lost her heart to a countryside waitress. The rain hit the city streets in relentless sheets, bouncing off polished glass towers like the drumming of impatient hands. Alina Vance's Mercedes cut through the storm, its sleek silver frame reflecting blurred neon signs and red brake lights, a mirror of her own tightly controlled life. At 35, Alina had built an empire that dwarfed anything in her family history, a company that reshaped industries, a name whispered in boardrooms like a secret spell. Her life was steel and numbers, contracts and quarterly reports, a carefully constructed fortress where emotion was a weakness she could not afford. Men had tried to breach that fortress, intruders with charm, ambition, or desperate longing, but she had rejected them all, every single one, too predictable, too needy, too fragile. Her heart had been a silent witness, untouched, unyielding, until the storm forced her into unfamiliar territory. It was supposed to be just another day, board meetings, emails, strategy sessions, and shareholder demands. But nothing had gone as planned. The CFO had betrayed her in front of the board. Amelia, her sister, had screamed accusations over family inheritance. A hostile takeover threatened to dismantle her empire in the span of hours. The weight of it all crushed Alina until she slammed her phone against the wall, a sound more violent than her own internal screams. She drove aimlessly, the city dissolving behind her in gray streaks of rain. There was no destination, only the desperate need to escape. Hours later, somewhere deep in a forgotten fold of the countryside, her engine coughed again, and died. Stranded. Alone, vulnerable. The diner appeared like a beacon, a flickering neon sign reading "Eat" against the gray drizzle. It was small, worn, almost entirely unremarkable, yet it offered something Alina had not felt in years: refuge. She pushed open the door, a bell chiming above her head, and stepped into a world unlike her own. Warmth hit her like a physical presence, a mix of coffee, frying bacon, and sweet cinnamon. The place smelled alive, calm, real. And then she saw her, Lena. Behind the counter, wiping down with meticulous care, she moved as though the chaos of the world outside held no power over her. Dark curls framed her face, a tangle restrained by nothing more than a simple leather strip. Her apron was faded, her t-shirt and jeans plain, yet the way she carried herself was magnetic. Not polished or glamorous, honest, grounded, unpretentious. Lena looked up and met Alina's eyes, green, moss-colored, steady, curious, but not judgmental. "Car trouble?" Her voice was soft but firm, the kind that demanded no attention yet offered quiet authority. "You could say that?" Alina snapped, more sharply than intended. She was soaked, furious, stripped of her usual armor. Lena simply nodded, her gaze scanning Alina's ruined blouse and bespoke suit, assessing without malice, without pretension. She poured a steaming coffee into a thick ceramic mug and placed it in front of Alina. "You look like you could use this more than I can." It was the first crack in the armor. Alina, CEO of Vance Innovations, a woman who built empires from nothing and left competitors trembling, felt the stirrings of something she had long denied: interest. And yet annoyance immediately followed. How dare this small-town waitress be indifferent to her wealth, her power, her presence? The next 3 days were a trial of patience. The diner became her forced sanctuary as the town's only mechanic, Earl, informed her that her car part wouldn't arrive for several more days. In Alina's world, decisions were instant, crises managed in nanoseconds. Here time stretched and slowed, and the frustration gnawed at her. She retreated to a vinyl booth, her laptop a gleaming alien artifact on the chipped table. She attempted to manage her empire remotely, but her focus fractured repeatedly. Her attention kept straying to Lena. Lena moved through the diner with an economy of motion that bordered on hypnotic. Plates, coffee, conversations with regulars, small gestures of care. They were fluid, unforced, and mesmerizing. She didn't defer to Alina, didn't shrink in the presence of power. In fact, she seemed to see Alina not as a CEO, but as a woman exhausted by life, human and vulnerable. "You've got a lot going on there," Lena said one morning, setting a fresh cup of coffee beside Alina's laptop. "I'm working," Alina replied sharply, defensive. "Looks more like you're losing a fight with it," Lena gestured lightly at the screen. "The coffee, on the other hand, is best when it's hot." It was irritating, infuriating. True. Alina hated that Lena could see her vulnerability without flinching. But more than that, Alina hated how her heart gave a small, unbidden flutter at Lena's calm, precise confidence. It was a sensation she had long banned from her life. By the end of the second day, Alina began noticing the details. Lena's hands, capable and scarred, her laughter with Gus the cook, the way she knelt to help Mrs. Gable, an elderly customer, count her change with infinite patience. Each small act was a lesson Alina had forgotten. humility, respect, and kindness. Alina tried to reinforce the old barriers, leaving generous tips, acting detached. Lena accepted it all, her expression unreadable, yet her gaze occasionally met Alina's with a subtle gravity that unsettled her. The storm arrived again on Saturday, dark clouds bruising the sky, rain lashing against windows. Alina was trapped, powerless. Her conference call with the board failed as the lights flickered and went out. The wind and rain filled the silence. Panic rose in Alina's chest. She hated the dark, hated being helpless. But Lena approached with a candle, placing it on Alina's table and a mug of chamomile tea. Gus swears by it for frayed nerves. The gesture, simple and human, melted something deep inside Alina. Sitting across from Lena, Alina found herself speaking, confessing her life's crushing weight, the loneliness at the top, the constant vigilance against rivals. The words poured out, unfiltered, exposing the emptiness behind her wealth and power. Lena listened, her green eyes steady, her presence unwavering. Cages come in all shapes and sizes, Lena said softly. Some are made of glass and steel, some of expectations. She traced the scar on her hand lightly, revealing the first mark she had earned for herself, a symbol of liberation from her own cage. I used to live in one of those. I had to escape it, just like you are trapped now. Alina's world shifted. Here was someone with no title, no boardroom authority, yet her presence and insight carried more power than any contract or shareholder vote. She was grounded, real, human. And for the first time in decades, Alina saw a life outside her fortress, a world where respect, humility, resilience, and quiet strength mattered more than money or status. The revelation was subtle at first, then undeniable. Alina found herself watching Lena not with condescension, but with fascination, admiration, and yes, something more tender and unbidden. This small-town waitress, unassuming, ordinary to anyone else, held the kind of strength Alina had spent a lifetime searching for and never found among her peers. The first part of Alina's journey had ended. The storm outside had not abated, but inside the diner, a fragile trust, a flicker of human connection, and the first real stirrings of love had begun to take root. The CEO had met her match, not in power or wealth, but in courage, kindness, and unwavering authenticity. The storm within and without. The days dragged on in the countryside, and Alina felt a strange, unfamiliar tension between frustration and fascination. Her carefully ordered life had been reduced to a small diner, a broken car, and a waitress who seemed indifferent to her wealth. Lena moved through the diner with the same calm grace, each gesture deliberate yet effortless, commanding respect without demanding it. Alina, accustomed to power and obedience, found herself unsettled by the subtle authority Lena wielded. It started with small moments. A misplaced order corrected before Alina even noticed, a kind word to a grumpy customer that diffused tension instantly, a nod of understanding when Alina's emails faltered under poor Wi-Fi. Every act reminded Alina of her own obsession with control and of the vulnerabilities she had long buried. She tried to remind herself this was a temporary setback, a pause before returning to her empire. But every time she looked at Lena, she felt exposed, fragile in ways money had never shielded her from. One afternoon, Alina overheard Lena speaking with Gus in the back. The tone of their conversation hinted at unexpected knowledge, shipping logistics, supplier networks, even tech trends. Alina paused, heart tightening. Could it be? She had dismissed Lena as simple, ordinary, yet here was someone whose insights ran deeper than any she had expected. Her curiosity flared. Alina attempted to maintain distance. She threw herself into her laptop, strategizing, planning, barking orders to her team online. But the more she tried to retreat into old habits, the more she noticed Lena's quiet interventions. A suggestion on a menu item sparked community goodwill. A casual remark about sourcing local ingredients revealed sharp business acumen. Alina began to realize Lena had a mind as disciplined and capable as her own, but grounded in empathy rather than ambition. One evening after the diner had emptied, Alina stayed behind to pack her laptop. Lena approached, holding a plate of freshly baked bread. "You've been pushing yourself too hard," she said softly. "You can't control everything." Her words were gentle but firm, a mirror to Alina's own inner turmoil. For the first time, Alina felt seen without judgment. It was disarming. The storm outside mirrored her internal chaos. She had built walls of steel around herself, rejecting everyone who approached too closely. Yet Lena had penetrated those walls without effort, her presence a quiet challenge to Alina's assumptions about power, status, and worth. Alina realized that this small-town waitress, unassuming in appearance, possessed an inner strength that dwarfed her own. The recognition was painful, humbling, and oddly exhilarating. By the weekend, Alina's respect for Lena had grown into something she could no longer deny. It wasn't just admiration, it was recognition of a kindred spirit, someone who had faced her own cages and emerged stronger. And yet, the question lingered. Who was this woman really? What hidden depths did she possess that Alina had only begun to glimpse? The first seeds of change had been planted. The CEO, once untouchable, was learning to see beyond appearances. And the waitress, quietly confident, held the keys to a revelation that could transform everything. The storm had passed outside, but the real tempest was within Alina, and it was only beginning. The hidden strength revealed. The following week, Alina felt an unfamiliar tension. She had spent years building walls around her heart and mind, but Lena's quiet presence was dismantling them piece by piece. It wasn't just kindness or calm that unsettled her. It was Lena's competence, insight, and unshakable confidence. Every small interaction revealed subtle intelligence and strength, qualities Alina hadn't expected from someone she had labeled ordinary. One afternoon, a courier arrived at the diner with a letter mistakenly addressed to Lena. Alina noticed her hesitation as she opened it. The envelope contained documents, charts, and correspondence that hinted at an impressive network of contacts, strategic knowledge, and resources far beyond the scope of a small-town life. Lena's hands trembled slightly as she read, but her expression remained calm. Alina's curiosity flared into a mixture of astonishment and suspicion. Who was this woman, really? Later, as Alina attempted to return to her work, her laptop froze. A crucial conference call required urgent decisions. Panic surged, but Lena approached. "I can help," she said almost casually. Within moments, she had devised a temporary workaround, rerouting communications, suggesting solutions that Alina herself had overlooked. Her mind was sharp, precise, and strategic. The realization struck Alina with force. Lena was not just capable, she was exceptional. The diner, once a refuge, now felt like a stage for revelation. Each small act, her efficiency, her problem-solving, her quiet patience, hinted at layers of experience Alina had never anticipated. It became impossible to see Lena as merely a waitress. The woman had been underestimated by everyone, including Alina, yet now she emerged as a figure of competence and quiet authority. That evening, Alina confronted her own pride. She had spent her life believing power resided in titles, money, and influence, yet here was someone whose skill and insight eclipsed her assumptions. Lena, unassuming and grounded, carried within her a reservoir of knowledge and talent that demanded respect. Alina felt a stirring of humility she had not known in decades, a recognition that strength could exist outside boardrooms, outside wealth, and outside conventional hierarchies. Later, Lena shared a story of her past in fragments. She had once been part of a high-level corporate strategy team, known for innovative solutions that transformed struggling companies into leaders of their industries. Burnout and disillusionment had driven her away, and she had sought simplicity, purpose, and authenticity in a small-town life. Yet the intelligence and skill she had cultivated remained intact, quietly waiting for the right moment to surface. Alina listened, absorbing the weight of Lena's journey. Respect, she realized, could not be demanded, it had to be earned. And Lena, in her unassuming way, had already earned it. Alina's admiration deepened, evolving into something more intimate, a fascination tinged with awe and vulnerability. She had never encountered someone who challenged her assumptions so thoroughly, so gracefully. By the week's end, Alina knew her life had irrevocably shifted. Lena's competence and hidden strength had cracked the walls she had built around herself. And while the revelation was exhilarating, it was also humbling, an acknowledgement that power and influence existed in forms she had long ignored, waiting for recognition, respect, and justice. Lessons in humility and trust. By now, Alina could no longer pretend she was in control. The small-town diner had become a mirror to her own vulnerabilities, and Lena, quietly confident and impossibly competent, was the reflection she couldn't ignore. Alina's empire was thousands of miles away, threatened by rivals and betrayal, yet here, in this unassuming place, she found herself stripped of titles, influence, and certainty. The morning began like any other. Alina tried to immerse herself in work, but her laptop continued to falter. The signals were weak, the connections unreliable, and every attempt to contact her board seemed to end in frustration. She clenched her fists, her stress rising to a familiar edge. That was when Lena approached, a calm presence amid chaos. "I can help you organize your priorities," Lena said softly. It's not about controlling everything. It's about knowing what matters most and acting where you can. Alina paused, hesitant. She had spent her life believing control was the only path to success. Yet Lena's quiet authority carried a weight she couldn't dismiss. Slowly, Alina began to hand over small responsibilities, tracking communications, coordinating logistics, even suggesting business strategies. Each time Lena succeeded, Alina's respect deepened. She realized her own arrogance had blinded her to talent in unexpected places. The town's residents, too, began to reveal the subtle power of humility. A farmer, a local shopkeeper, even Earl the mechanic offered insights Alina had never considered, reminding her that wisdom could reside outside corporate towers. Every interaction chipped away at her pride. She began to see Lena not just as a helper, but as a guide, someone who could navigate the chaos with patience, intelligence, and compassion. One afternoon, as Alina watched Lena manage a rush of customers with effortless precision, she finally asked the question that had been haunting her. Why stay here? Why this life when you could be anywhere doing anything? Lena paused, placing a plate of food on a table. Because power without purpose is empty, she said. I chose a life where I can make a difference, however small it seems. You'll understand soon enough. The words struck Alina like a revelation. She had built empires, commanded armies of employees, yet she had rarely paused to consider purpose beyond profit. Lena's humility, grounded in skill and ethics, challenged everything Alina thought she knew about success. By evening, the storm returned, darker than before. The lights flickered, the wind howled, and Alina's laptop failed completely during a critical call. Panic rose, but Lena's calm hand reached for hers. We'll figure it out together, she said, her voice steady against the roar outside. For the first time, Alina allowed herself to lean on another person, to trust someone completely. It was terrifying and liberating. She realized that her fortress, once a symbol of strength, had been a prison. Lena had shown her a different kind of power, one rooted in humility, resilience, and mutual respect. That night, Alina stayed longer in the diner, watching Lena interact with the community, gently correcting a child's spilled drink, offering encouragement to a nervous new employee, sharing laughter with Gus. Every small gesture was a lesson in grace under pressure, in kindness as strength, in competence without arrogance. Alina's admiration deepened into awe, and she began to understand that true leadership was not measured by authority, but by the ability to uplift, respect, and trust others. By the end of the week, Alina had transformed in subtle but profound ways. Her priorities had shifted. She was no longer only the CEO of Vance Innovations. She was a student of life, learning lessons she had long ignored, guided by a woman she had once dismissed. Lena's quiet strength had opened her eyes to the richness of human character, to the power that comes from respect, empathy, and authenticity. The turning point. The following week brought a series of unexpected challenges that tested Alina in ways her corporate life never had. A critical deal for Vance Innovations was on the verge of collapse, and Alina's usual strategies, aggressive negotiations, sharp ultimatums, and endless pressure, felt meaningless in the face of circumstances she could not control. The unreliable internet, her absence from the city, and the looming storm of deadlines combined into a perfect storm of stress. She sat in the diner, her hands wrapped around a mug of coffee, feeling the weight of powerlessness. For once, she could not buy her way out, control her way out, or intimidate her way out. Everything depended on patience, empathy, and judgment, and she had no one to rely on but Lena. You're holding yourself too tight, Lena said quietly, placing a plate of food on the table. Let go of what you can't control and focus on what matters. You can't fix everything at once. Alina glanced up, startled. She had spent decades believing that perfection was required, that any failure reflected weakness. Lena's calm words carried no judgment, only clarity. Hesitantly, Alina began to share details of the deal, of the people involved, and of the mistakes her team had made in her absence. Lena listened intently, her eyes scanning documents, analyzing risks, and quietly connecting dots Alina had overlooked. By the afternoon, Lena had drafted a strategy that was bold, precise, and entirely unexpected. It involved compromise, persuasion, and the clever use of resources Alina had forgotten existed. It was the opposite of her usual approach, yet the logic was flawless. With Lena's guidance, Alina called her board, navigating the negotiations in a new way, one that combined respect, intelligence, and strategic patience. Meanwhile, Alina began to see how the townspeople had influenced Lena's approach. Their trust, resilience, and grounded sense of community shaped the solutions Lena proposed. Alina realized that power, when detached from empathy and context, could be destructive. Lena's perspective reminded her that true influence was earned through understanding, humility, and the courage to act with integrity. That evening, the storm hit in full force, rain lashing against the diner windows, lightning illuminating the small space in strobe-like bursts. Alina watched Lena move through the chaos with effortless focus, comforting frightened customers, guiding the staff, and maintaining a calm authority that seemed almost impossible. Alina's own panic began to ebb as she observed Lena's unshakable composure. It was in that moment that Alina understood the depth of Lena's strength. The waitress she had once dismissed as simple, ordinary, or powerless was in fact extraordinary, not in wealth or title, but in resilience, intelligence, and moral courage. Every small act of kindness, every calculated decision, every gesture of patience had built a quiet power that eclipsed Alina's own. For the first time, Alina experienced a mixture of humility and gratitude. She had spent her life rejecting those she considered beneath her, blinded by ambition and status. Yet here was someone she had underestimated completely, now holding the key to her success, and more importantly, showing her the kind of person she wanted to become. By nightfall, the storm had passed, leaving a calm, silver light over the town. Alina and Lena stepped outside, the wind still gentle, the rain leaving a fresh scent in the air. Alina realized that the greatest lessons had not come from her high-powered boardrooms, but from this small diner, this quiet woman who had shown her the true meaning of strength and integrity. The revelation and the heart's choice. By Monday morning, the diner was quiet, bathed in soft golden sunlight. The storm had passed, leaving a serene clarity in its wake. Alina sat at her usual corner booth, reflecting on the past week, the chaos, the revelations, the quiet lessons. She realized how profoundly her life had shifted. She was no longer merely a CEO managing empires. She was a woman learning humility, empathy, and the power of recognizing strength in unexpected places. Lena arrived carrying 2 steaming mugs of coffee. Her calm presence, effortless competence, and quiet wisdom had become Alina's anchor. "Ready for the day?" she asked, her voice gentle yet firm. Alina nodded, feeling a warmth she hadn't allowed herself to feel in years. The final piece of the puzzle, however, was still hidden. Lena had shared fragments of her past, her corporate experience, her musical talent, her intellect. But there was more beneath the surface, something Alina could sense but had not yet fully grasped. As Alina explained the latest developments in her business crisis, Lena listened carefully, then casually revealed an insight so precise, so powerful, it stunned Alina. She had anticipated complications, planned solutions, and even suggested creative maneuvers that Alina had never imagined. It was at that moment Alina realized the full truth. Lena's life had not been ordinary. Every choice to step back, every decision to live quietly in this town had been intentional. She had deliberately chosen authenticity over ambition, compassion over recognition, yet her skill, intelligence, and strength had remained undiminished. In the quiet of that diner, Alina saw not a waitress, but a force of nature, someone who could have ruled boardrooms, led empires, or commanded global influence if she had chosen. The revelation struck Alina profoundly. For years, she had measured worth by titles, money, and appearances. Lena had taught her a different metric: integrity, resilience, empathy, and the courage to rise above expectation. Alina's respect deepened into awe, and awe transformed into something more intimate. She recognized the courage it took for Lena to live authentically, and her heart responded in ways she had never anticipated. As the day unfolded, Alina and Lena worked side by side, solving logistical problems, coordinating communications, and managing crises with seamless collaboration. Alina was no longer the sole authority. She was a partner in a shared effort, learning to trust, to defer, and to value perspectives outside her own. Each small victory, each insight from Lena, reinforced the lesson Alina had learned throughout her stay. Underestimate no one, respect all, and recognize that true power often resides in humility, skill, and kindness. In the quiet evening after the last customer had left, Alina and Lena sat together on the diner's porch, watching the sun dip below the horizon. The air smelled of rain and fresh earth, and the silence between them was comfortable, rich with shared understanding. Alina's hand brushed Lena's accidentally, and for the first time she allowed herself to acknowledge what had been growing all week: a profound admiration, respect, and deep affection. Finally, Alina spoke. "I used to think I understood strength," she said softly, but I see now that I was blind. Everything about you shows me what true power really is. Lena's eyes, moss green and steady, met hers. And you've shown me that even someone from my world can be trusted to lead, to fight, and to care, she replied. There was no hesitation, no pretense, only honesty and connection. Elena smiled, a rare, unguarded expression that mirrored the liberation she felt. The fortress she had built around herself had crumbled, replaced by trust, respect, and the courage to love without fear. She realized that the greatest victories were not measured in empires won or deals closed, but in the hearts changed, the barriers broken, and the lessons learned. The aftermath and lasting change. Weeks had passed since the storm, yet the events of that week lingered like an indelible imprint on Eleanor's life. She had returned to the city, to boardrooms, emails, and endless schedules, but she carried with her a new perspective, a quiet wisdom she had never possessed before. The empire she commanded still demanded attention, but her approach had changed. Where she once led with control, intimidation, and rigid authority, she now guided with respect, empathy, and collaboration. The world she had built on power alone seemed smaller now, diminished in importance compared to the lessons she had learned in a simple country diner. She had discovered that influence was not merely a matter of titles or wealth, but a reflection of integrity, courage, and the ability to recognize and uplift the talent in others. Lena's example had taught her that true leadership was inseparable from humility. Elena found herself thinking of Lena often, not as a fleeting fascination, but as a guiding presence, a mirror reflecting the potential of life lived authentically. She remembered the small gestures that had revealed Lena's hidden brilliance, the calm in a crisis, the clever problem-solving, the unwavering compassion toward every person she encountered. Lena had not only reshaped Eleanor's career decisions, but had fundamentally shifted her understanding of what it meant to wield power responsibly. Back in the city, Elena implemented changes immediately. She began mentoring employees she had once dismissed, seeking advice from voices she had previously overlooked, and cultivating an atmosphere of respect and collaboration. Her board, initially skeptical, soon recognized the value of this new approach. Profits remained strong, yet more importantly, morale and loyalty soared. The company thrived not because of fear or dominance, but because Elena had learned to trust and empower others, a lesson she had learned from a woman she had once underestimated. But Elena's transformation wasn't only professional. She carried the memory of Lena into every aspect of her personal life. She reflected on the vulnerability she had once feared, recognizing it now as a strength. The walls she had built around her heart, carefully constructed to shield herself from disappointment, had been dismantled by someone she had thought she could ignore. In their place was a willingness to connect, to love, and to embrace the unexpected joys life offered. Months later, Elena returned to the small town, this time not stranded, but intentionally. She stepped into the diner, greeted by the familiar aroma of coffee, fresh bread, and the warmth of community. Lena was there, as steady and graceful as ever, yet Elena noticed something new, a quiet pride in the life she had chosen, a serenity that radiated from her. They exchanged smiles, one layered with history, understanding, and unspoken gratitude. Elena realized that the true reward of that stormy week had not been a single solved crisis or a saved deal. It had been the reshaping of her perspective, the dismantling of arrogance, and the recognition that the most extraordinary people often live outside the spotlight. Lena, once dismissed as a simple waitress, had taught her the ultimate lesson. Respect is earned through integrity, power is measured by kindness, and love, unexpected, transformative love, can change a life forever. In the quiet diner, Elena knew that she had not only found a partner but had discovered a deeper truth about humanity. Those we underestimate often hold the greatest potential, and instant karma, justice, recognition, and respect sometimes arrives not as punishment but as revelation.